If you would be so kind as to get your Bible and turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3 and verse 1. Today I'd like to talk from this subject with your prayerful consideration. It's your time. It's your time. Would you look at a neighbor and say, it's your time? Well, maybe that was the wrong neighbor. Look at somebody else and say, it's your time. You've been waiting for a long time, but it's now your time. The Bible has much to say about time. With every ticking of the clock, it reminds us of the importance of time. And read along with me as we read from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter number 3, verse 1. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. And growing up, my parents told me, don't put more on your plate than you can eat. And so I just want to talk about one verse today. That's about all I can eat today. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Would you allow me to read it just once again? To everything there is a season. Not to some things, not to most things, but to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. And to all who are present today, my message to you today is that it's your time. It's your time. Today is the 14th day of a new year. The 14th day of the new year. You wonder where time is going, already 14 days into a new year. It's only now 64 days until the beginning of spring. As a small boy living in the state of Louisiana in the rural area, Shreveport was 60 miles away. The nearest town was Homer. We lived probably 12 miles into the interior. We lived, I'm trying to put it nice, we lived in the country. We lived in the woods. Has anybody here today ever lived in the country? Or all of you all city dwellers, all right? But if you've ever lived in the country, just wave at me. If you've ever lived in the country, all right? If you've ever visited the country, wave at me. All right. Thank you. Thank you. And then hopefully you can relate to what I'm about to say. And so as a small boy living in the country, of course, there was no electricity, there was no plumbing and all of that kind of thing. We were in the rural, we were in the country. There were two books that were read more than any other two books in the rural area. The number one book that was read was the Bible. The second best read book was the Old Farmer's Almanac. And of course, if you're not from the rural area, you have no idea what the Old Farmer's Almanac would be. But there were two main books that were read in the country, the Bible and the Old Farmer's Almanac. The Old Farmer's Almanac was published in 1792 by a man named Robert B. Thomas, making it the oldest continuous publication in North America. The Old Farmer's Almanac was written to deal with three things. Number one, weather. Number two, the position of the moon. And number three, astronomy. It was in the year that was 1858. A young lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln used a copy of the Old Farmer's Almanac to refute the story of an eyewitness who said that he had seen a crime. The client of Abraham Lincoln had been accused of first-degree murder, and Charles Allen stated that he was an eyewitness to the murder because he saw it by the light of the moon. And so Abraham Lincoln argued that fact and refuted the fact that Charles Allen could not identify his client by the light of the moon because on that particular day, August 29th, 1857, the moon was in such low condition that it would be impossible to see by moonlight the person that was being accused of the crime. The point I'm trying to make is that the young lawyer, Abraham Lincoln, got his client off because the Old Farmer's Almanac said that the eyewitness, could not have identified the man by the moonlight because on that particular day there was little moonlight. And so I'm trying to tell you the importance of the Old Farmer's Almanac. In 1863, the circulation of the book was 225,000 copies, but by 1992, they distributed more than 4 million copies of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Again, it dealt with weather predictions, it dealt with temperatures, and it dealt with rain. When I was a small boy, I would watch the older people and my parents in particular as they began thinking in terms of planting crops. They wouldn't do anything until they first of all consulted the Old Farmer's Almanac. Well, I'm here to tell you that not only did Thomas publish a farmer's almanac, God has a divine almanac also. And God's divine almanac deals with times and seasons and purpose. It deals with times, seasons, and purpose. As a young boy, every farmhouse and every farmer had tools that were kept in the barn. Number one, they had an abundance of plows, and they had an abundance or several mules. And so if you're going to be a farmer in the rural areas, when I was a kid, you need plows to plow the ground, and you need mules to pull the plow. They had no tractors. They had no modern machinery to cultivate the soil. And so farmers had to invest in plows and in mules. In the autumn, the farmer would take and he would plow under last year's crop. Follow me if you would. The crop that he had harvested from the last season or last year, he would get the old mule, he would hitch it up to the plow, and he would plow under whatever had been left that had not been harvested from the last year's harvest. Whether he had harvested crops of cotton or corn, whether he had harvested wheat or potatoes or sugar cane, and most of you all don't know anything about ribbon cane or sugar cane. Y'all don't know nothing about solemn syrup. I know I'm talking to the wrong folk because y'all grew up in the city. The farmer crops, when they had been turned over by the plow, the farmer crops, when they had been turned over by the plow, those things that had been plowed under or turned over became mulch or became fertilizer for the new crop that was going to be planted. Because once the crop had been harvested, the natural supply of nutrients had been taken out of the soil into the plant. And so therefore, the farmer had to replenish the nutrients in the ground, and he did it by the use of fertilizing. Walk with me through the text, if you would. There need to have been a refilling of what was taken out. And you know, the Holy Spirit does refill us. And it's great to have been filled, but we need to be refilled. We need to be refreshed. And that's why the farmer would add nutrients and fertilizer to the soil. Okay. The farmer had to replenish the soil. Last year's crops became the fertilizer for the new year's crop. These fertilizers contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so God, in his divine almanac, takes the things that we experienced last year, the hurts from last year, the disappointments from last year, the letdowns from last year. Did anybody have any problems last year? God takes those problems from last year. He takes those heartaches and heartbreaks. He takes even your haters from last year and he turns it over. Woo! Those things were on top last year. But God, through his miraculous plows all of that stuff now under. And it is now under you. Well, it's about time that somebody ought to shout, because all of that stuff has been plowed under you. So I can't keep complaining about the hurts of yesterday and the disappointments of yesterday and the folk that let me down yesterday and what my haters did yesterday or last year, because God has plowed them over. Woo, that's a shouting point. That's a shouting point. Somebody ought to be shouting about now. It's all been plowed under and turned over. Now, when we talk about fertilizer, there's a commercial fertilizer, but then all of the bad stuff. I told you a mule pulled the plow. The mule had to have restroom breaks. Oh, yeah. The mule had to have restroom breaks. He didn't have a toilet to go to, so he had to do his business in the field. But now the plow turns it. Oh, y'all don't get it, y'all don't get it. Somebody had to deal with some stuff last year. Some smelly stuff, some stinky stuff last year. But God turned it over. He plowed it under. Somebody shout out, it's your time. All of the dung and the stuff last year was just a prerequisite for your miracle today. You know, I love reading history. As I was reading this week, I came across an incident that happened in 1519. An explorer by the name of Herman Cortez believed that the time had come to venture out. And so he, along with 11 ships, left the old land, and they arrived at the new country, which is now called Mexico. 11 ships carrying 600 soldiers. The 600 soldiers, once they came to the new territory that is now called Mexico, they had no will to fight. They were tired from a long voyage and a long journey. The natives of Mexico were not friendly. They were very hostile toward Cortez and his 600 men. They were in a strange land and in a strange country. Cortez's men were discussing going back to the homeland. Cortez understood that the time had come that he needed to do something. And I want to talk to somebody today that the time has come that you need to do something. And so what did Cortez do? He sent one ship back to Spain. That one ship was loaded down with golds and precious stone, but the other 10 ships he set afire and sunk in the harbor. Again, he sent one ship loaded with gold and precious jewels back to Spain, but the other 10 ships he set afire and he burned the ships in the harbor. Well, wonder why did he do something like that? What was the message that Cortez was trying to send to his men? He sent a message that we need to get today. He said to them, there is no turning back. There's no turning back. You're thinking about going back to Spain, but he burnt the ships, so there is now no means by which you can go back to Spain. Look at a neighbor and say, no turning back now. He said, we've already landed in the new country, and there is now no turning back. God has given us a new year, and there is no turning back. Somebody said that I've gone too far to turn back now. I've gone too far from where I started from. Can you think a moment in your mind where you started from? And if you would be real with yourself, you've gone now too far to go back now. Cortez was telling his men there are no off ramps. No off ramps. You got to stay on this turnpike. As long as there were ships in the harbor, they could think in terms of going back to Spain. And so the lesson is that you got to burn the ships in the harbor. Well, can I preach for a moment? What personal lesson does that suggest to me? If I'm having some problems in my commitment to the Lord, I need to burn some ships in the harbor. If I'm going to have a wonderful marital relationship, I got to burn some ships in the harbor. A lot of marriages are messed up because people left ships in the harbor. Instead of burning the ship in the harbor, they then ran back and got on board of the ship. Oh, y'all don't hear what I'm trying to say. And so you got to burn the ship in the harbor. There are a lot of relationships. There are a lot of people, Lord have mercy, that would impede your spiritual progress. You got to burn the relationship in the harbor. There are some habits that are causing you problems because you have never burned the ships. The ship is still anchored off in the harbor. Lord. And as long as the ship is anchored in the harbor, you can always go back and board the ship. But there is no turning back now, no turning back. Psalms number 1, it tells us about the blessed man or the blessed person. Said that the blessed man or the blessed person is one who recognizes that he's got to meditate on the word of the Lord day and night. You've got to recognize your season and be prepared for that season. Fruit will not be sweet if it's picked out of season. Even in the restaurants, there are certain fruit items on the menu that tells you only served during its season. One of my favorite pies is olive berry pie, but it can only be eaten in season. And the season is June and July. If you want olive berry, which is a cross between a loganberry and a blackberry, if you want that pie, you got to eat it in June or July. That's the only season that it's available. And Psalms 1 and 3 says, the believer or the blessed person is like a tree planted. Planted by the rivers of water that brings forth his fruit in its season. His leaf does not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The blessed person doesn't just grow, he's planted. Well, let me preach for just a moment. The blessed person doesn't just pop up and grow, he is planted. Would you help me preach and look at a neighbor and say, you've been planted. You've been planted in the family that you're in. You've been planted. You've been planted on that job. You've been planted. You've been planted in this ministry. You have been planted. Weeds pop up anywhere. Weeds grow anywhere. But we're not as weeds. We don't just pop up. God plants us. God positioned us. And we have been planted. But when you've been planted, you grow down for roots before you grow up for height. Isn't it something interesting that so many people want to grow up before they go down? But in order to stand the storm up there, you got to have some roots down here. God isn't concerned about how high you go up. He's concerned about how far down you go in depth. What is your level of commitment? How deep is your level of commitment to Him, first of all, and then to the kingdom? Abraham Lincoln said these words, die when I may, but I want it said that I plucked up a weed and planted a flower wherever I thought a flower would grow. Think about it. Abraham Lincoln said, I want it to be said of me that I plucked up a weed. I pulled up a weed, but I planted a flower. Come on, help me preach again. Look at another neighbor and say, let's pull up some weeds. Come on, tell them again, let's pull up some weeds. All of us know weeds around us. Let's pull up some weeds. But where we pull up weeds, let's plant flowers. Somebody shout out, let's plant some flowers. What can you do to plant some flowers? What can you do to bring beauty to someone's life? What can you do to bring happiness to someone? What can you do to bring joy to somebody? What can you do to bring and create excitement with somebody? Pull up the negative. Pull up the negative, and where you pull the negative up, plant a flower. I challenge Gospel Memorial today, those of you who are here as well as those who are online, plant some flowers. In this brand new year, let's plant some flowers. It's your time. It's your season. Again, God has a divine almanac. There's a time to plow under. There's a time to plant. But now it's time to rejoice with what God is about to do. It's like waiting in line. From the back of the line, and God now is about to take you from the back to the front. And that's what the life of Dr. Martin Luther King was all about. He wanted to tell white America that it was time for the blacks to come from the back to the front of the bus. It was time to stop drinking in colored water faucets and drink in just water faucets. It was time to no longer just go to colored restrooms. It's now time to just go to restrooms. It's no longer time to go to the back of the restaurant to eat. It's now time to sit down at the counter. It's your time. And so since God has already plowed stuff under, since God has already planted, it's now time to reap the harvest. It's like brothers and sisters waiting at the red light. But when the light changes from red to green, it's time to go. I want to tell somebody in the next few moments that it's time to go. That God, you've been waiting at the red light. You've been waiting at the intersection. The light has been on red, but God has now changed the red light into green light. And so since God has given you the green light, it's time to go. It's time to go. It's time to go. God changed red lights into green lights. I'm wondering today, has God done that for anybody? If that's you, would you just jump up and say, "That's me"? Sit back down, sit back down, sit back down. Some of you will get it tomorrow. You know, when the light goes from red to green, it's not for everybody. Because that would be a calamity. But while some are at the red light, others have the green light. Now you may stay there if you want to, but God has changed the light. Have you ever been at a light that turned green and people wouldn't move because they're on their phones? They're looking at this and that, and the light is green, but they're not aware that the light has turned green. Help me shout out and say, "That's me." God has turned my red light into green light. And since God has turned my red into green, it's time now to go. It's time now to take your foot off the brake and put it on the accelerator and hit the pedal to the metal. And time to go. God has given you a green light. Personally, in your own individual life, God has given you a green light. Gospel Memorial, God has given this church a green light. And we need to get our foot off the brake and put it on the accelerator. And we need to squeal. We need to peel rubber. Have you ever seen anybody peeling rubber? They're in a hurry. Let's peel some rubber and let the devil know that the light is turned green. Somebody shout green light. Help me say it again, green light. Sit down for a moment. It's green light. Let the pedal hit the metal. It's time to move forward. I'm excited about what God is about to do. As I close, a singer by the name of Donald Lawrence and the TriStar City Singers in 2009 recorded this song, It's Your Season. He said, I feel the seasons everywhere. I feel blessings in the air. Can anybody feel blessings in the air? Those seeds that you have sown, you're going to come into your own. Seasons, walk into your seasons. Donald Lawrence said, I feel seasons everywhere. I feel blessings in the air. Those seeds that you've sown, you're going to come into your own. Walk. Help me say, walk in your season. He said, I believe that we're in a time when God's going to bless the saints. When God is going to bless the saints. Those who have stayed, those who have prayed, He's going to fulfill the promise that He made. I heard the Spirit say, it's your time. Walk in your season. Come on, help me say, walk in your season. He went on to say, I know that you've invested a lot and the return has been slow. But I heard the Spirit say that it's your time. The waiting is over. Walk into your season. You survived. Look at somebody and say, you have survived. Look at somebody else and say, you have survived. I don't care what it was. You have survived. God brought you through. Walk in your season. The worst is behind. Look at somebody and say, the worst is behind. Walk into your seat.